It started 3 years ago. You didn't know it then, you don't know it now, but somewhere in a federal database, one you cannot access, one you cannot search, one whose existence you are legally prohibited from confirming with the institution that created it. There is a file with your name on it. It was filed on a Tuesday. You paid a bill that morning, made a phone call, probably had lunch. And at 2:14 p.m, while you were doing something completely ordinary, a compliance officer at your bank opened your account, reviewed a transaction you had already forgotten about, and filed a suspicious activity report with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. You were not notified. You are not allowed to be notified. The bank cannot confirm the report exists. Federal law prohibits them from telling you. And that file has been sitting in a government database for 3 years. Today, you're going to find out what that actually means. The Asset Guardian. Let's start with what a suspicious activity report actually is. Not the legal definition, the real one. A SAR is a document your bank files with the federal government when it believes, or when its automated monitoring system believes, that a transaction in your account looks suspicious. That word, suspicious, is doing an enormous amount of work in that sentence. Because suspicious does not mean criminal, it does not mean investigated, it does not mean charged, indicted, or convicted. It means a pattern was detected that a compliance system has been trained to associate with financial crime. The Bank Secrecy Act, the law that created this system in 1970, requires every financial institution operating in the United States to maintain an anti-money laundering monitoring program. The program watches every transaction, every deposit, every wire, every withdrawal. And when it sees something that matches a pattern, it has been trained to recognize. It escalates. A human compliance officer reviews it. They have a low bar to clear. Not guilt, not probable cause, not evidence beyond reasonable doubt. Reasonable basis to believe, that's it. And if they clear that bar, the report goes to FinCEN, and it stays there. In 2023, financial institutions in the United States filed 3.8 million suspicious activity reports. 3.8 million in 1 year. To give that number a shape, that is more than 10,000 reports filed every single day. More than 400 every hour, more than 6 every minute. The system never sleeps. It never pauses. It never questions whether the pattern it detected was the result of criminal intent or perfectly ordinary human behaviour. It just files. Most of those 3.8 million reports resulted in no law enforcement action. The Department of Justice has never published an official SAR to prosecution conversion rate. But independent academic research, looking at the data that is publicly available, consistently finds that the overwhelming majority of suspicious activity reports are never acted on by law enforcement, which means the overwhelming majority of people in that database are people who triggered a pattern, not people who committed a crime. And one of those people might be you. Here's the part that changes everything, because the SAR doesn't just sit there. This is where most people assume the story ends. A report gets filed, nothing happens. Life continues, case closed. That assumption is incorrect. A suspicious activity report in FinCEN's database is not a sealed record. It is not locked away from the financial system that you live inside. Other financial institutions, banks, credit unions, brokerage firms, mortgage lenders, can query FinCEN's database as part of their own customer due diligence processes. They cannot read the contents of your SAR, the specific details, the transaction, the amount, the reason for filing. Those are protected. But they can see that a SAR exists. They can see that your name at some point was the subject of a suspicious activity report filed by a financial institution. And that information, that single data point stripped of all context, becomes part of how they evaluate you. You apply for a business loan 3 years after the report was filed. The lender runs your name. They don't see the transaction. They don't see that it was $9,400 to a legitimate supplier. They don't see that no law enforcement action was ever taken. They see SAR on file, and their risk model adjusts accordingly. You will never be told why the loan terms changed. You will never be told that a report exists. If you call your original bank and ask, and people do ask because eventually something feels different, something doesn't go through the way it used to, something is slightly harder than it should be, they cannot answer. The gag order in the Bank Secrecy Act is not a technicality. It is a structural feature. The system is designed to be invisible to the people it is built around. This is the moment people start to feel it. Not the filing, not the review, not the 23 minutes a compliance officer spent with their account 3 years ago. The moment something in their financial life, something they can't quite name, starts to feel harder than it used to. A rate that comes in higher than a friend with the same credit score. An account application that takes longer than expected. A business relationship with a new bank that never quite feels as open as the old one. They don't know what changed, and they don't know a file exists. They don't know that 3 years ago, on a Tuesday afternoon, a judgment was made about their account. And that judgment is still active. I want to ask you something directly. Has anything in your financial life, a rate, an approval, a banking relationship, ever felt slightly off in a way you couldn't explain? Leave it in the comments, because I think more people have felt this than know what to call it. Here is what you are legally entitled to know. You are entitled to know that the SAR system exists. You are entitled to know that your bank is required to maintain an anti-money laundering program. You are entitled to know, if you know to ask, that FinCEN maintains a database of suspicious activity reports. What you are not entitled to know: whether a report has been filed on you, what triggered it, what it says, whether it is affecting decisions being made about your financial life right now. There is no appeal process. There is no correction mechanism for a SAR that was filed on someone who did nothing wrong. There is no expiration date on suspicion. The report exists until FinCEN decides it doesn't, and FinCEN sets the retention schedule. Not you. The compliance officer who filed that report 3 years ago was not malicious. She was applying a standard, reasonable basis to believe that the law requires her to apply. She saw 6 flags on an account. She made a judgment call. Maybe she was right. Maybe the accounts warranted scrutiny. Maybe she was applying a system that is structurally incapable of distinguishing between a legitimate business and a criminal one when their behavioural patterns look identical. The system does not ask her to resolve that question. It asks her to report the suspicion. Investigation is someone else's job. An investigation, in the majority of cases, never comes. The suspicion just lives there, in the database, attached to a name. Here is what changes now that you know this. Not much, and everything. You cannot retroactively prevent a SAR from being filed. You cannot remove one once it exists. You cannot access it, correct it, or contest it through any standard consumer process. What you can do is understand the system well enough to make better decisions inside it. Document the context around significant transactions. Not because you'll need to defend yourself, you may never need to. But because in the 23 minutes a compliance officer spends with your account, a file that tells a coherent story is treated differently than a file that only tells a pattern. The system processes patterns. Humans process context. And at the moment that matters, the moment a human being opens your file, the context you created is the only voice you have in that room. Because you won't be there, you'll be at home, not knowing the meeting is happening. Subscribe. Because the system has been running your entire financial life, you should probably know how it works.